Lovers of lore, thank you for joining me for the third installment of the Streets of New Capenna story as it unfolds. Enjoy some beautiful visuals while I go ahead and fill you in on what's going on with the story now. So, in the main story, in the last episode, Elspeth was bouncing around to different jobs and then got pulled into the Maestros. So, now we find her working for the Maestro. She is up in the museum, which is near the top of one of the high rises of Capenna. She's appreciating the view up there. She is cataloging all of the different angelic and Phyrexian statues, all that sort of thing they have going on. But ultimately, she's not really able to get any time alone with Xander, the leader of the Maestros. And this persists for weeks after her joining the Maestros, until ultimately she does gain a private audience with Xander, and they have this sort of discussion where he wants her to work for him, and she basically goes, look, I don't want to be out there injuring or killing people for you to get what you need. And Xander's coming back because he is essentially a vampiric demon. He's like, yo, the price of knowledge is found in the veins of others, which I should say is an interesting way to look at things, right? So he's basically like, no, I will not force you to kill, but you're coming to me for information, and nothing is free, so you are going to have to do some work for me. At this point, it's either time for you to commit to joining the Maestros, or it's time for you to leave. Xander knew what he was doing, right? He knows that he's got his hooks into Elspeth because he's the only one who has the information that she is looking for. So she hesitates, but ultimately agrees. And her first task that she is given is being a package runner. She has no idea what it is. Basically, she just has to go to some kind of back alley with an unremarkable blue door that belongs to the Obscura and drop this package off. So she does that with literally no problems, returns to Xander, who's pleased, and he starts to basically drip feed her information, starting at the very beginning. So the city of New Capenna was founded on a deal that was made between archangels and demon lords. So it wasn't really that the demon lords overtook the angels. They were actually originally allies that were bound together by a shared foe. But Xander doesn't know who the shared foe is. The details are somewhat hazy over all of the histories, but according to Xander, the angels were handling the defense of the entire plane that they were on. So the demons stepped up to take care of the city of New Capenna. And what they did was they essentially set the 5 crime families to rule over the city of New Capenna. Now, originally they weren't established as crime families, right? They were just there to rule over the city of New Capenna. Pacts were made with all 5 of the family heads. So each of the heads of the crime families made pacts with these archdemons, right? And as a result, their fundamental nature changed and they were all turned into partial demons. And that's why Xander is a vampiric demon. So Elspeth asks a very natural question in this situation and says, hold on, wait a minute. So when the city was founded, these pacts were made, and you're one of the heads of the family. Does that mean you were around back then? And Xander agrees, yes, he was around back then, right? So she turns around and says, well then, why don't you know who the enemy is? What's good? Like, this just seems like nonsense to me. So Xander explains that the Pact's magic has affected his memories. And he was also elsewhere during most of the fighting. No more is said about that, so we don't know where Xander was, right? That's all that he's willing to talk about at this point. He basically says, for the work that you've done, that's the information that you have earned. So it continues along with this sort of thing. The next time Elspeth goes out, she has to do what is essentially an escort mission. So there is somebody who's being sent out, an informant, and she has to trail them without really being seen and make sure that nobody causes them any problems. So the informant itself doesn't actually run into any problems on the journey, but Elspeth, because this is happening late in the night, and because she's up on the rooftop, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, and she gets jumped by 4 raccoon folk. All of a sudden, she just feels something pretty decent sized on her back, like a big fat sack of grain weighing her down. What is this? So it turns out there's a bunch of raccoon folk coming at her. She ultimately just grabs the one off of her back and whips it at the other 3, knocking them all all over, and then she's able to jet out of there quickly without them being able to stay up on her trail. So ultimately, there wasn't a lot of danger in that interaction, but it didn't go as smoothly as the first mission. So, when Elspeth returns, one of the things she does is she demands from Xander a weapon. She's like, yo, I need a weapon. And Xander says, you're going to need to earn that. Now, admittedly, Elspeth's a planeswalker with magical capabilities. I don't know why she couldn't easily acquire weaponry, but whatever. That's just part of the story, right? So, they sit down to actually drink some Halo. This is her first interaction with Halo. She looks at it, imbibes some of it, and she feels strength pulsing through her veins. But at the same time, Halo surprisingly tastes of joy. A combination of your best memories and your deepest desires in your imagination are all melded together into an epic experience. But most surprising of all was the magical power that flowed through her after she drank this stuff. So she was clearly impressed with the idea of Halo and found out by talking to Xander that Halo was actually the last gift of the angels. So before the angels disappeared, the last thing they provided was Halo, which makes you wonder, what exactly is Halo? Is it purified Phyrexian oil? Is it made out of pure angelic essence, angel blood? What is it, right? So basically, Xander pretends not to know what the purpose of Halo is, right? Elspeth is digging for details. Xander doesn't know who the Phyrexians is. Elspeth thinks that this was meant to use against the Phyrexians, and Xander's playing it off, but at the same time, Elspeth can read from him that he's most likely being false at this point. Now, moving on to the third mission. The third mission was to deliver some Halo, and this is done in one of those meet me in the park style scenarios where basically Elspeth has to head to a particular park at a particular time, and there will be a brown paper bag just looking discarded by a park bench. And that is her like drop-off point, right? So she goes to where that bag is, and as she's reaching out for it, a hand grabs her wrist, right? It's Vivian. Vivian's like, hey, I was wondering who was going to come and pick this up here. Let's have a friendly chat. So they both kind of feel each other out as planeswalkers, right? Discuss who they are, what's going on, and like, why do you want to help me here? Basically, Vivian's coming to Elspeth and saying like, hey, before you get in too deep with the different families of New Capenna, I believe there's information that you need to know, right? But that conversation gets cut short as people that Vivian doesn't want to know she's there turn up. So she basically has to disappear and isn't able to explain to Elspeth why Elspeth needs to wait, right? Because Elspeth doesn't know what's going on with Vivian and everything else. There's some deep stuff, craziness going on with that, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But Elspeth returns to Xander yet again after completing this mission, right? And at this point, she's realized she actually likes Xander. She's like, you know what? I don't particularly trust him, but I do like him. So this time, their conversation turns to talk of the adversary, right? And they say, basically, Xander explains that the entire balance of New Capenna is threatened. This will impact ultimately the Halo trade, because the adversary, who we know but they don't know, is Ob Nixilis, right? He has been snapping up all kinds of members of the crime families, and at the same time, he's been siphoning off parts of the Halo trade, right? So the more and more of the Halo you control, the more power you have. But the 5 families require Halo, right? It is necessary. It is the lifeblood of their operations. So if the adversary is able to take too much Halo from them, then their organizations will fall apart. And what will happen is that will lead to massive turf wars. They have a sort of organized chaos right now, right? Where the 5 families maintain order because they all have what they need. But if there's not enough to go around and there's only enough for 2 families or 3 families and you've got 5 families, you can see the type of battling that would cause. And considering that they have to deal with the fact that the Halo supply is running out on New Capenna and some unknown threat can exist outside of the city of Capenna, and once those protections fall, the city could be left to the depredations of the rest of the plane. There is a lot hanging in the balance here, right? So Xander says, you have a very important next mission. The mission is to infiltrate the Cabretti. You need to find out if the font is a real thing. If the font is a real thing, you need to locate where they have it and leave the door to that room unlocked. So that's the mission she's given. Xander at that time presents her with a blade. Here's a knife. You've earned it. There will be better ones to come. At which point Elspeth actually shakes her head and says, no, son, that's not how we're doing this. Our deal is, if I go and do this for you and find the font and help you with this, no more drip feeding me information. You will tell me absolutely everything you know. And this causes one of those kind of reactions from Xander where he like leans back and like, you know, it's like a big ask. So he sits there and contemplates for a moment and then ultimately agrees. He's like, that's the deal then. So they do Elspeth up in proper flapper girl style, right down to the point where they make scale mail armor for her legs that look like fishnet stockings. I just love the flavor concept behind that. That is a lot of fun, right? So Elspeth finds her way into the Cabretti organization. She basically goes to a Cabretti party, but she's having a somewhat hard time kind of fitting in and getting what she needs. But she luck-sacks out when she stumbles into meeting the Leonin lounge singer, Kit Cantano. So Kit, she likes Elspeth when she meets her. And when she hears Elspeth's name, on top of the fact, like, basically Kat heard Elspeth overheard talking to other people, figuring out, yo, she wants to know if she can work for the Cabretti during this big celebration. So the lounge singer's like, hey, you want to work for the Cabretti? Your name is Elspeth? That's a trip. Come with me. I got somebody you need to meet who's going to love your name, right? And so then Elspeth actually gets introduced to Ginny. And if you remember from the previous lore videos, Ginny is the right-hand woman of the main member of the Cabretti, the leader of the Cabretti. So basically second in charge of the Cabretti, and is tickled pink by Elspeth's name. Think of Elspeth like you would think of a really old school Earth name like Mildred or something, right? So she hears her name as Elspeth, and it's like, yo, I haven't heard that name. I haven't seen that name on anything but a tombstone in forever. So that kind of lends more towards Elspeth coming from outside of the city of New Capenna, right? Like, there are most likely survivors outside of the city of New Capenna. And New Capenna has marched into the future with more technology and upgrades, but the people outside of it are living a more old school life. So older names persist. There's not this, you got to keep up with fashion, you got to keep up with trendy names and everything like that, because they're probably just focused on trying to survive. Or they literally may be kept as like feeder people for Phyrexians. The entire plane could be coded in Phyrexians that just have all these humans trapped and use them for whatever purposes they want. And New Capenna is the only safe place on the entire plane. I'm really curious to see what is going to be around outside of it. But anyways, Elspeth meets Ginny. Ginny likes the cut of her jib and says, you know what, come on board. So that's how Elspeth manages to inveigle her way into the Cabretti. Now, there is a side story as well that brings a number of other elements to the forefront, and the side story focuses around Vivian and Tezzeret. You'll remember in the previous part of the story that Vivian was approached by Tezzeret, and Tezzeret said that he was working with Urabrask and the Side of Freedom. And that was enough to get Vivian to go, okay, you know what? I'm not sure what's going on. I'll follow with you, right? So at this point in the story, Tezzeret and Vivian are heading down into the bowels of New Capenna. And if you didn't know, New Capenna is built on the remnants of old Capenna, right? So it's like some cities on Earth, actually, where if you go down deep enough, there are catacombs and remnants of ancient civilizations. So the original Capenna resides below New Capenna. New Capenna essentially sits atop a massive netting of girders, gigantic, massive metal girders that are interlaced, and New Capenna literally sits on top of that above old Capenna. And you can just fall and lose your life. Boom, you fall off those girders at the bottom of New Capenna and plummet down into old Capenna. That can just straight up end your existence. So, Vivian and Tezzeret are headed down into the bowels because that is where Urabrask is, right? And Vivian's basically kind of trying to feel Tezzeret out. She really doesn't know that much about him, so she's listening to the sounds that he makes as he moves or whatever. There's this clanking, and every once in a while, from the way his clothes move, a little bit of light kind of emanates from his clothing, and he can tell that she's curious, and also he knows that she knows all about the Gatewatch and everything, so he knows that she's going to know about the planar bridge, right? The planar bridge being a tool that Tezzeret has at his disposal that allows transporting things across the multiverse. Normally, only planeswalkers can travel across the multiverse. Any other beings need something special to protect them from the Blind Eternities, or it will instantly end their lives. So the planar bridge is just such a device. And Tezzeret is merged with the planar bridge. And so, in a show of faith in some ways, he literally takes his garments off and shows the planar bridge inside of his body to Vivian. And Vivian's astounded, right? Because she is linked in to the natural world and very keyed into nature and what is real. And Tezzeret's body is incredibly artificial. His rib cage is just tiny little ethereum metal slats. And inside of this is a giant empty space. Well, not exactly empty, because the planar bridge pulsed within there with this crazy light flowing out. And Vivian at this point is like, what are you doing showing me this? And Tezzeret says, this is basically a show of my good faith to get you on board and let you know I don't have any secrets to hide. And also, just so you know, the planar bridge's nature has changed. And Vivian's quizzical about that. What do you mean? He goes on to say that it's been corrupted because of the people he's been transporting through the planar bridge. Those people specifically being the Praetors from New Phyrexia. Basically, Tezzeret is a servant of Elesh Norn, right? And so Vivian at this point is getting more worried. Wait a minute, Elesh Norn, that's the Phyrexians. She knows what the Phyrexians are. She knows the Phyrexians are one of the single biggest threats in the entire multiverse, right? So it's like, wait a minute, you work for Norn? And at this point, they've just reached where Urabrask is. And Vivian doesn't know that Urabrask is a Phyrexian. So she sets eyes on him and immediately freaks out. You bought a Phyrexian! Like, she pulls out her bow, knocks an arrow loaded with a bunch of spirit beasts that are ready to just rip into Tezzeret and Urabrask at the same time. And Tezzeret's standing there with his hands up going, whoa, 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 whoa. Easy now. Easy now. We're all friends. It's all good. Stay calm. You know what I mean? Be chill, right? And then Urabrask is also freaking out at the same time. He's like, Tezzeret, what are you doing bringing her here? Why are you betraying me? But he doesn't even really have the energy to be super emphatic about it, because Vivian notices at that point that Urabrask has no flesh, right? Phyrexians are an amalgamation of flesh and metal. All of the flesh from Urabrask's body is gone, like it had been cut away by a surgeon. And Urabrask is leaning there by the wall, just struggling to breathe. And it turns out that this is actually the effect of transporting the Praetors through the planar gate. Not only does it warp the planar gate itself, but it literally cooks on, like rips all the flesh off of the Phyrexian's body and just leaves them as the barest husk. So Urabrask is barely alive, but Vivian is still at maximum concern levels with her arrow drawn pointing at both of them going, what is the deal? Why should I not destroy you right now, right? But Tezzeret had turned to Urabrask and he basically was saying, calm down, calm down. She's going to help us out, right? She is against the Phyrexians. And so they go on to explain, basically, what happens is Vivian wants an explanation from Urabrask. Why should I work with you, right? And Urabrask says, Elesh Norn has subjugated multiple other Praetors. So she's already got Jin-Gitaxias and Vorinclex completely under her thumb. Sheoldred is not really under Norn's thumb the same way. However, Norn has taken a lot of Sheoldred's factions for herself as well, right? And Norn's plan is to complete the entire multiverse under the rule of Elish Norn. Now, Urabrask, as we talked about in the previous lore, he's red aligned, and he is a very freedom first individual. Remember how I talked about when the the Mirrodin was invaded by the Phyrexians, right? They tried to take it over, and they succeeded. There was a Mirran resistance, and when the last fragments of the Mirran resistance made it down into Urabrask's part of New Phyrexia, Urabrask told everybody to leave them alone. Well, it turns out those Mirran survivors are still alive now. Urabrask has not destroyed the Mirrans. He believes in the vision of Phyrexia, but he does not believe in Elish Norn's vision of Phyrexia, and he doesn't believe that all of Phyrexia should be united under any one particular leader. He believes Phyrexia should be all, but at the same time, all should be free, which is an interesting and unique position for a Phyrexian to hold. So now you have one Phyrexian who's got a massive power base. You have another Phyrexian who's secretly working against them. They don't know that Urabrask has traveled to New Capenna to seek out hope. But the craziest thing about all of this, right, is that Vivian is tasked with finding a few things. When Vivian ultimately goes, okay, you know what, you're right. You guys are going against the Phyrexians. The Phyrexians are a huge threat. I will team up with you. So, what do I need to do? So she's given two tasks. One, find Halo, because we need the Halo, right? Urabrask needs to study Halo, and he needs a decent amount of it. And more importantly, you must find Elspeth, because Elish Norn is terrified of Elspeth. There's something special about Elspeth that is an absolute threat to her plans and all of Phyrexia. How cool is that? I want to know what's going on. Anyways, that wraps up this batch of lore. We're going to dive in tomorrow with the next batch. I am definitely enjoying doing this as it unfolds story, so hopefully you guys are too. If you love what I'm doing, hop on the Patreon, and then come back tomorrow for some good lore action, and for some more lore action right now, I got some links up on the screen, either more Capenna lore or some other stuff. Knock yourself out. See you guys tomorrow.